for us to set the scene for this conversation, I was thinking, so we just heard from all of these great panelists, and now we're going to try to boil down some of these ideas to a discussion around platform monopolies, a free press, the democratic process, and some of the competition tools that we have available historically in this country and that we are trying to recuperate, right? So for some of you who may not be completely following all the things that we are so obsessed about, as Barry said, Twitter is now property of Elon Musk, and what a property it is. Google is getting sued yet again by the Department of Justice for anti-competitive conduct. Facebook, if you haven't heard, is also getting sued for data privacy violations in the European Union. So there is a lot going on. And so with that, I guess, if we wanted to explain the landscape of communications infrastructures, I think in general, when you talk to people about social media, there is a sort of, I guess I would call it a cognitive dissonance, because we all feel that these platforms have become so inextricably intertwined in our lives that we feel they're so essential. So how can we understand that they also bring so many problems, right? Yeah. So how do you think about those issues?
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you to Barry for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue through the anti-monopoly perspective. And before we really jump in, I want to center this conversation and take the opportunity to center this conversation around Gen Z, my generation. And the reason why, before we jump into the larger landscape here and why we have to start here, is because my generation has been served up on a silver platter as sacrificial lambs to big tech executives to be experimented on, to have our data mined and used against us in really predatory ways, to have our mental health suffer to these algorithms of both racial oppression and also oppression in the sense of gender bias. And for us, this is our fight in a very intensely personal way. And that's why I love the call and the purpose of this event too, which is to bring the conversation of anti-monopoly to a human level and to talk about the kitchen table issues. And I guarantee you this is one. It may not feel like it, but there are parents all around this country right now having conversations about the effect that big tech is having on their families and on their kids. It is a kitchen table issue. The polling backs that up. And so the larger landscape here is, how do we approach these issues in a way that actually breaks through and makes a difference? And we have to do it now. We have to do it now. Our kids cannot, and we just got a shout out for the second year in a row in the State of the Union, by the way. That's how forefront these issues are. We cannot sacrifice our kids any longer for this inaction. We must take action now. And thank you. Yeah, I think Gen Z is so poised to take on these issues because the whole anti-monopoly movement we're having such a moment right now with Ticketmaster and Taylor Swift, with the Southwest Airlines disaster that I just lived through over Christmas and was all over social media, this baby formula situation, and primarily big tech and the lack of choice in the way that we're being preyed on. Mm-hmm. You know, this is something that's in the forefront of our minds, and we're going to lead this fight. And so with all of that landscape, we come to the reality that is the big tech landscape and the market concentration and the lack of choice and the way that all of these policy issues are really lined up for action right now.
Well, that was great, Cheyenne. So the other day, then we talked a little bit in preparation for this panel. Something that I asked you as well was, so where do you see this takeover of Twitter going, right? Especially because it's a platform that your generation, my generation, I'm a millennial, we built together. And just I guess I would add as background of why we want to talk about the harms that the ownership of Elon Musk of Twitter is actually so concerning. I think I will bring basically three things. First of all, I think it is the first time in history that I can recall from all my business coverage in South America and here that we've seen a company being gutted from the inside, real time, targeting the safety and the data security teams. So that basically puts, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this company on the verge of non-compliance with the FTC regulations on that side.
The verge is generous.
I know you can definitely talk about that in more depth. Second, I would really like to bring attention to the suppression, the censorship, really, of American journalists just for doing their job. I don't know if you remember, there was this sort of quote unquote a scandal, because it really shouldn't have been one, where there was a Twitter account that was basically showing tracking information of a jet that belonged to Elon Musk. And he basically accused everyone who was sharing that information of doxing. And doxing is really more of a concept that you use when people are disclosing private information with the intent of harass you. They can actually use that information to harass you in person, in real life, as going to your home address, or just harass you on the phone. It's a completely different concept that he tried to push to victimize himself and use that as an excuse to basically turn that into a content moderation policy, which I think it's a little bit crazy, to say the least. And third, I would also just call attention on what is happening with Twitter in other countries besides the U.S. Something that happened recently in India, and India is, I think, being one of the countries that has been more affected in terms of staff at Twitter. They had about 200 staffers, and now they're down to 10% of that, and they're still working there. And recently there's been some uproar because not only Twitter but YouTube blocked a BBC documentary that just basically was not of, it was uncomfortable to the current ruling party in India. And so we can see there that there is also, I think, early evidence through that example that Twitter no longer has an incentive to fight back authoritarian regimes. Actually, at the time that the deal was happening, Twitter had sued the Indian government for trying to push them to block content that was clearly suppressing, or that tried to suppress, human rights and the free press in that country. And so I think moving forward with Twitter, that's something to be said, and to follow the case in India, because it has been reported, and other journalists have written about this as well, that Elon Musk is currently also looking to break into the Indian market with Tesla and Starlink satellites. And so I do think there is a problem of conflicts of interest that definitely arises when you have a person like Elon Musk with such a power, not only monetary power, but political power, that runs a platform like Twitter that has been so relevant for Indian journalists for a very long time. And it is also at the same time trying to negotiate the entrance of other companies that he owns at the same time. So I think it is likely, we don't know when that's going to happen, how that's going to look like, that we can see now that there is a possibility of having Twitter being leveraged to benefit other businesses that Elon Musk also owns. And when you're covering business and just business in general as a journalist, I say one of the first things that you see in the landscape of where business is going is this conflicts of interest. And I'm so glad that the head of the Jonathan Cantor brought this idea of the relationship between non-discrimination laws and how we can see that applied to conflicts of interest, right? So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. I kind of went into the segue of business and ethical problems, but I know that you have done a lot of research and also you're paying attention to human rights violations. So how do you see Twitter being so important in that landscape, and the risks that you see now that are arising after the takeover of Elon Musk?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, it's worth taking a step back and away from what we think our experience of Twitter is versus what it is on a global scale. I know for me, I use Twitter as a place to get in touch with reporters and find breaking news stories. But on an international scale, human rights movements have been born and led and fed through this platform. And to have a megalomaniac billionaire be able to go in and acquire it and break it and take that tool away is a serious loss. And it is a human rights concern. It is. And so I think that that's something that I think a lot about. And my background, while I was in law school, I worked for a former United Nations Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression. And his whole approach to that mandate was big tech, because that's the freedom of information and expression in our society now, is how we are able to connect through technology and talk to each other and exchange ideas. And to lose the marketplace of ideas, frankly, to somebody who purchased the thing because his ego was too fragile to stand the idea he might be criticized, is, we should all be ashamed, like Barry said. It is a serious loss, and it is broader than, just like a meme. It's a human rights concern.
Now, and I know that everyone is sort of just laughing about his behavior, right? We had news today that he ordered the entire engineering department to basically build a system where we, the users, can be bombarded with his thoughts.
Yep.
And so right now, because nobody wants to know what he's doing or what he says anymore, so now he's just pushing that information to us against our will. Yeah, so that's funny, but that same multipliers algorithm, I don't remember the exact name, can be used for other purposes, right?
Yep.
And it's like at the beginning of, I remember this very clearly because I've been a user of Twitter since 2009. and I've seen all the evolution of it just being sort of a slow, more of a intellectual, let's just see what's going on with this platform, to then having all of these different features where you can do video streaming, where you can retweet. And then I saw also how all these pieces were accommodating to make the place safer, because it is not like Twitter was a paradise, or any social media platform is a paradise before the purchase of Elon Musk of this specific platform, right? But I think that there should be a recognition that there was definitely some good work that was happening on that platform, especially in the sense of access to information, to the data that platform contained, for the use of researchers to basically try to explain what the effect of the platform is in society, right? And so I want to pivot now to something that I think is equally important, and is Google. So Google is pretty much ubiquitous in our lives at this point, and we sort of take it for granted, I believe. And we sometimes forget to see that in the end, Twitter, Google, Facebook, all of these platforms that bring so much concern about their effects in democracy and just the democratic process overall, without public oversight, really, and this is, I think, sort of the bottom line where we want to get here, without public oversight, I think we are, without noticing, creating a single point of private control for the future of the internet, and possibly also just a single point of failure. And I know it's really hard to change the mindset of people who have been using these platforms and who reap a lot of benefits from it, because that is the point. How do we make platforms that have become so essential in our lives to be regulated in a way where we can all reap the benefits of having them so embedded in our lives, right? And so in the case of Google, I think something that hopefully will be more of a conversation amongst publishers and all web creators in general, is the role that it has played in intermediating a multi-billionaire industry, which is the digital advertising industry. So like, I guess I would just share 2 data points with you just to see the enormity of this problem. So globally, digital ad spend is around $600 billion average. Facebook and Google make up 65% of that. In the United States, that market is around, will be this year in the value of $350 billion. And if we add Amazon, we already also have, only in the United States, more than 60% market share just going to Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Now, specifically for Google, and I'm so glad that Jonathan Cantor didn't actually go into the details of that lawsuit, so I can brief you on that. I think the important thing, the main takeaway of that lawsuit, which is 150 pages, is that it really tells a story of the many years, 15 years, that all web publishers, and that includes the news media and individual artists, just anyone created content and put it on the web, on the open web. All the years that we've been, and I will include myself, we've been subject to the opacity and the lack of transparency of the practices of just one player deciding who gets paid for what in this industry. Because for anyone who has been working in journalism in the mid-2000s and on, we have been through the transition of going from paper to digital. And I know that there is a lot of debate about who supported that movement and who didn't. But for me personally, I was very excited to finally just catch up with the digital revolution. But in the end, we entered a journey to put value to our content, only to see it constantly diminished by this player. And so just to give an example, right? Google, Facebook, they both run programs that fund newsrooms across the globe. There is a study recently, I don't remember the name of the author, but it's someone from the University of Toulouse in France. The 2 companies combined have funded more than 6,000 newsrooms across the globe. Their programs are about $300 million each, 165 million euros between 2017 and early 2022, so up until last year. According to the DOJ lawsuit, Google would have run a series of ad pricing manipulation schemes. And only in one of those examples, basically what the DOJ says is that Google pocketed about $200 million as a result of one of those ad pricing manipulation schemes away from competitors in this market that were working with publishers that chose not to work with Google products to sell their ads. And so I think this lawsuit, hopefully we'll see that evolve to a jury trial, like Rana mentioned earlier, really brings the change that we need in this market. And I'm very glad that one of the reliefs, the main relief that is being asked in that lawsuit is the breakup of Google's advertising units. I will tell you, it would just seem crazy for anyone to say that 5 years ago, especially coming from journalism. But I think the more we dive into this lawsuit and we bring it together with all of the several cases that target similar issues with Google, the more clearer we see why this conversation is so important and why it is so determinant for the future of the internet.
Yeah, it's hugely important. And let's also just talk about how amazing it is that we have an administration that's bringing these kind of ambitious actions finally, right? We're far past time. And I'm really excited about the FTC action on data privacy. And I think that actually connects closely to the topic of antitrust, because that's another place where we're seeing power being entrenched and utilized against consumers. I think in the State of the Union, President Biden said something to the effect of capitalism without competition is extortion. And in the data privacy sense, it couldn't be more true. We're literally being extorted with our intimate data by these platforms. And without interoperability, we have no choice. And so looking forward, this Google action is really exciting, but we also have a lot of other things as a coalition that we have to look forward to and to come together and move the ball on. We need to get these bipartisan big tech bills passed. It truly was a David and Goliath story in the last Congress. We were so close, and Public Citizen and I, we worked on this report that really demonstrated just the breadth of what we were up against, the millions of dollars that industry poured in to stop these bipartisan bills from making it across the finish line. And if you feel like we're not in the moment to do anything, I challenge you to reconsider. We absolutely still are. We still have this momentum, and we need to get them across the finish line. It's going to make a difference.
I think we're out of time. Just as a final thought, and just agreeing with Cheyenne as well, it is not only that we need to come together as a movement, but I think we also need to come together more particularly in the recipes of reliefs that we are looking to promote. So hopefully we get more of these structural reliefs, more of these non-discrimination laws, more of this discussion embedded also in sort of all of the recipes that we propose as an anti-monopoly movement. And just keep in mind that anything that is decided in the US has a tremendous effect everywhere else around the world. Yep. So whatever happens here will for sure embolden journalists, human rights activists, and all sorts of people who are also very excited to see this type of movement happening today in the United States. So thank you.
Thank you.